really brave to shut down RGA, the digital production studio that was the biggest in the world, to make RGA shift to a digital interactive agency, where today they're the largest in the world.
Yeah.
It was also courageous to fire the person who controlled American Express because it was a bad cultural influence.
And so what decisions did you make in the lead up to that? And how did you get to that point?
So the decisions, I think, are you have to focus more on opportunity than risk.
Yeah, totally agree. And we'll talk a bit about that. I think, Eleanor, what about you?
So Will just flagged up just before we were having this today that he might ask me about brave leadership and the toughest decision I ever made. And prior to being the CEO of GlobalGiving, I was the CEO of a grassroots organisation in Kenya working with street children and their families. And just after I took the reins of the organisation, we lost 60% of our budget. So I'd only been in the role for 2 months. Losing 60% of the budget had nothing to do with me. I feel I should flag it up. So we lost one of our key suppliers, and I had to really look very rapidly. I didn't know the team very well, and what could we be as an organisation, and what should we keep, and what should we get rid of. And I had to work really rapidly to stop some of our programmes. And I think when you're the boss, people really like certain activities. And we ran a rehabilitation centre for street children, helping them go back to their families. And we ran some day centres, and everybody liked them because they gave consistency. You got connection with the children, and people had done them for a long time, and people knew how to do it well. And so the bravest decision I took was to build the trust of the team, to ask really difficult questions and get them to collectively agree to terminate our programs and focus on our mission and actually rebuild from our mission using a lot of evidence to do better programs at lower cost. But I think it wasn't me making the decision, it was actually getting my team to say we can no longer do this, but we can protect our core. I think we rebuilt our organisation, we became award winning, but it didn't happen overnight. It took us like 4.5 years, and we became the leading kind of child protection agency in Kenya and one of the best in Africa, but it was really painful. And I think not being afraid and being open and letting people see that it's painful, but that you know where you're going, really made a difference.
That's brilliant. Because I do think within the digital economy, we're having to make decisions like that at greater frequency. And so what do you think leadership looks like in the future, particularly in an increasingly digital world?
Yeah, so GlobalGiving is very much a digital-first organisation, and I think leadership in a digital-first organisation is fast. There is no time to be slow, and there are risks associated with that, but you have to be fast, you have to be formidably adaptable. And that's not saying to your team they have to be adaptable, that is you yourself, and in how you guide people, how you communicate, and how you make decisions. So even if you had a certain type of management approach in the past, you have to be willing to change that. I'm very passionate about algorithms and how they build great organisations, but also how they can kill organisations. And so I think leadership in a digital economy is also understanding the around algorithm. That's going to be very scary if you have been a leader for some time, because maybe you didn't understand data, you didn't become a data scientist, but actually you're managing people who are dealing with kind of massive reams of information. So speed, agility, and being really open and really value-led, because if people understand your values and buy into your values, when you make mistakes, which you are absolutely going to make mistakes if you're working at that pace. I make mistakes constantly, everybody. Some little ones, some big ones. I try to take everybody along on the journey, but that's what's enabling us to thrive as an organisation.
Yeah. So David, I mean, you work with a lot of great leaders yourself, and I think it's a really interesting point about having to retrain leaders, because a lot of them have big egos. And so, so learning the algorithm of your business requires some retraining. What's your experience within that and working with people, and how open do you think people are to doing that?
So I think there's an inverse relationship usually between the old algorithm of people rising up in an organization and their willingness to be courageous and their willingness to be vulnerable. And the ultimate courage is the willingness to be vulnerable, to address reality, to call garbage garbage, and to move on from it. And the higher up people get, it's hard to have that courage because somehow being wrong reflects on them. When the truth is, being wrong is how you learn, and you need to celebrate the winning from losing the same way you celebrate winning.
Totally agree. And I think that it brings in kind of a startup mentality, and particularly within these large global organizations. And from your business, starting from a startup, what do you think leadership can learn within the digital economy, and how do you make startup culture part of it as you grow bigger and bigger?
So GlobalGiving is very passionate about kind of the lean startup model, which obviously been advocated by people like Google. I think that what you can learn, and I think the challenge is keeping a startup mentality as you grow, and there are key ways that you can do it. But it is that, GlobalGiving has 4 key values, and they guide everything that we do, and are linked to being a startup. So always open. So ideas can come from any place, any shape, and any form, and you should never. Your environment must be that anybody across the organisation can put forward that idea in a really democratic way. We say never settle, so never say that it's good enough. You've got to keep pushing, be really relentless. And then we say listen, act, learn, repeat. And listen, act, learn, repeat is very much trying to truly embed that learning cycle. So you don't just learn from a piece of work, but you amend your strategy in a really agile way. And then the third one, we did start in America, is like commitment to wow, but that's about your customer, but it's also about your colleague. And if you're not delivering exceptional service to both your customer and your colleague, you can't succeed. And those things around that startup mentality, the fact that you can, we always say fail faster. So don't over-agonize, test it out. If it didn't work, just move on. And I think that minimal viable product mentality will have to have like a much greater usage. In terms of scaling, because GlobalGiving is scaling globally at the moment, what we're learning is that you have to enable true local autonomy as you share, tech. So you want to centralize your tech, irrespective of where it's geographically located, but you must give that true autonomy and ownership, because in a digital economy, your employees want to have responsibility and they want to really learn things. If you don't have that, then it begins to fall apart, because then you end up in bureaucracy. You can't act quick enough to kind of capitalise on the bigger players. Because that's what you do in a startup. You know that the bigger players are slow, so you know that, and that's why you act super fast so that you can take advantage. I had told Will before that in the terrible earthquake in Nepal last year, 2 years ago now, we know we drive funding direct to existing local organisations on the ground who we knew were there before the earthquake and are still there now. But we know we have like a 3-day window in which to really maximise our marketing and comms and really use all those digital tools available, because the bigger agencies are going to be a bit slower because they've all got to have a decision on Monday morning. So, it's the middle of the night on Friday night and we are already operationalising. We were the first people in the world to have an appeal up for the Nepal earthquake, and we crowdfunded about $5 million from 47,000 individuals within a short period of time. But we hadn't been nimble and kind of to exploit the larger organisations' inability to move, we wouldn't have been able to make a positive difference.
So David, how can we get larger global organisations to move quicker?
So I think there are some great lessons from startups. Lesson 1 is successful startups are passionate about the end user. Successful startups create a place of psychological security where people understand the framework but are free to act. Big organizations can learn how to distribute leadership, how to create frameworks in which entrepreneurial behavior can happen. But too often, big organizations operate with a dog leash instead of a kite string. And that's not the way to move quickly and not the way to get the best out of an organization.
Yeah. And it really requires an openness and how the successes that happen are celebrated and shared across the network as well as the failures.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when people know that action, it will be rewarded, even if it results in failure, you're going to get better positive results.
Yeah. So how do you do that within your organisation, Eleanor, in terms of celebrating both?
So it's a really good question, and actually I was thinking about it this morning because before I came I was doing some email and we were trying to celebrate some quick wins, because I think if you want to go for the really big prize, you've got to celebrate lots of smaller, quicker wins, because I think the big wins are going to be harder and harder to obtain long term in this really complex economy. And so we have something called horizontal appreciation in my organisation. So I have a background in community organising. I went to an amazing training one day many years ago, but it's about not waiting for appreciation and recognition from the boss, but actually taking substantive structured time on a monthly basis to appreciate somebody else in your team for some specific work that they did. And I think that's incredibly important. But I also think it is giving people the status and the opportunity to take it forward. So historically the best kind of gifts go to the boss. Whereas I actually think, as the boss, it's being able to step outside of that and say, well, if this person is showing leadership in this area and kind of this innovation and this win, how can I create other opportunities for them to build their confidence in that area and get that external recognition? So rather than just building your personal brand, really thinking about how you've helped people build their expert brand. And for me, you know, if I build somebody real excellence and leadership and they go to another organisation, well, if they enable that organisation to do better and to make positive change, I'm also okay with that. So I'm happy to build the leaders of the future. I'm not saying they all have to stay with me. But we celebrate and appreciate people in a way that we have very high retention.
And on the failure side, because I do think that it's just such an interesting topic, and specifically as a leader, how open are you as a leader in the failures that inevitably happen in the fast speed world in which we're operating?
So actually, myself and my colleague Rachel Smith, who's our Director of Operations and Programmes, we're actually the UK Fail Festival winners in 2014 and 15. So we were willing to be very public in some of the things that we've screwed up in our bid to help people. So I think that's an indication of how open. But I'll also, and one thing I've tried to do more and more of, is when we're having kind of brainstorming initiatives in our office or really thinking, you know, my crazy idea, is to help people to see my own thinking process and how terrible some of my ideas are. You know, I am a real idea generator, but I will put them out there and I will show people what is wrong with some of my ideas and kind of how it's gone wrong. And that has really enabled a much more open culture where people will speak up and be noted. But we've run several experiments in GlobalGiving that have not worked. But it is because we've made a culture where it's okay to admit that it's wrong and we're more interested in the learning behind it. It's made everything kind of flow in a much better way. But I want my team, like the reason that I lead with values is because my team trusts me, so they're okay if we get it wrong, because they know that the intention is good and we will do better from it.
Yeah. What about you, David? Like a values-based culture, and I love the idea of a failure festival. Have you ever been to a failure festival?
Well, I've been to a shit show, but I don't think it's the same as a failure festival. I guess you could call it that, but it wasn't really celebrated the way you're talking about. But I think the key elements to get to that place is to create a framework that everybody understands.
Yeah.
And when the framework is clear, management can own the why and the what and give away the how. And the how is an individual freedom to act within that. And in a lot of organizations, that's not possible because the reins are too tight, or the framework's not clear enough, or the right things aren't celebrated. So the fear of taking risk and failure is endemic.
In GlobalGiving, obviously it's not really enough if we internally celebrate failure, because what we see kind of in the third sector is that lots of people do okay work, but actually lots of people are replicating other people's mistakes. So we actually run a fail forward series, and so we offer incentive prizes to our grassroots partners to go online, and it's like on our website, and if you tell us a really good story of failure, we'll give you points in our kind of gamified system of learning and give you access to more funding. And so we're trying to incentivize other people to talk about failure. And when I'm thinking about organizations at scale, I would be having some kind of online series or competition where you're rewarding the best failures, even if you keep it internal, so we're external, because actually everybody loves to win.
Yep.
So that's the way to kind of nudge and encourage it in your own organization.
Brilliant. Just to change track for a minute, you have multiple stakeholders that you're dealing with around the world, and trust and transparency is something that's been talked about a lot here, and really shining a light on leadership, particularly in the digital economy. Trust and transparency are critical to partnership and partnership with our clients. How do you build trust and transparency with all of those multiple stakeholders that you deal with?
So really important. So I know I don't want to sound repetitive, but I think people knowing your ethics and your values is really important. But it actually does go into one, like how public are you in reporting how you're being and what you're doing. So at really basic level, are you communicating what you're doing on a regular basis and allowing people to comment on it in a public way, in a public forum? We're one of the only organisations in the UK that does a public annual general meeting, and anybody can come in and inspect us, and it creates that kind of openness. We also do it online because I'm working with people in 168 countries. But I also think it's when things don't go well, taking the time to explain. So for example, when you pitch for new clients, or maybe you have a really important account and there's a cock up, and kind of you just move on from that. I apologise for the language for Facebook Live. But a really good example, so I've been helping a very kind of wealthy individual at the moment give out grants to startup, entrepreneurial, grassroots organisations in certain countries. And we had kind of clear guidance on how we were going to award the money, and we did it really, really well for about 15 months. And then she changed her mind, but she didn't tell me, which is fine. And then she told me at the last minute, but I'd already run a really good process to get a new set of recruits for her application fund. And then, so there was a rapid change in her own thinking. So lots of people who thought they were going to get grants and put in a lot of time to do applications suddenly were not eligible. Now, the easy and quick thing to do would have just been, I'm really sorry you're not successful because it's a competitive situation, but actually taking the time as a leader to communicate with each one of those leaders on what had happened, the process that we'd gone through and the results, and still, take the time, got someone to help me, but give them feedback, meant that all those organisations trust us even more, because they said nobody else would bother to take the time to say why our application didn't succeed, and I can apply that learning to something else. So now you become more and more my go-to. And the reason we're very open with our kind of clients and constantly communicating, and we do answer the phone, which is really important stuff. We do respond to the emails. We are using AI on our website to talk to people, but we also use real humans. And I think that personalisation of trust actually is really important. So we don't have the solution yet to deepening relationships through technology. Technology only enables us at the moment to enhance the number of connections we have. But if you can use tech to further personalisation, you can have better kind of trust. And I think that transparency, so everybody understands. So GlobalGiving has built a rewards dashboard, and everybody can see it, and everybody can see how we make decisions, how points are awarded, and how they can participate, in the game. And I think being really clear, and that is really helpful for employees, for volunteers, and for your clients, because it means that they don't think that the playing field is biased. And most people right now think that the playing field is biased in most of our interactions. So if they can believe that you're trying to address that and really make it fair, then I think you begin to succeed.
Yeah.
I don't know what David thinks.
Yeah, that clarity and openness is just absolutely critical. And David, I think that we've seen, again, continued transformation within organisations. And so the Amazon Whole Foods acquisition that's happened, you know, Oath being formed last week, and the completion of the acquisition of Yahoo, you know, you're involved in that side. Is that what transformations are happening within these organisations? And as leaders, you know, it seems like the pace and the multitasking that's being asked of leaders today is ever increasing and ever growing. How can leaders deal with that and manage that, not only today but in the future as well?
Well, I think the most important thing, leaders basically have 5 jobs. The first job is to define a worthy purpose that's important, that's bigger than quarterly earnings or global domination, something that's important. Secondly, great leaders create a credible bridge which people can understand about how they're going to get to the promised land. And that's left off half the time. But to your point, the third thing leaders do is give their teams comfort with constant change.
Yeah.
They give their teams an ability to feel that change is always going to be there, and to give them the opportunity to identify it, shape it, and ride it.
Yeah.
Great leaders also create cultures where people feel safe, people feel connected, people feel able to take risks. And lastly, great leaders can empower small, cross-discipline, multifunctional teams to own important parts of the organization without having to go up to the top to get permission.
Yeah. So, I think those are 5 really useful things. If there are people in the audience here today who want to learn to become leaders, what do you think the most important thing to learn is?
I think the most important thing to learn is to change the headset from thinking of yourself as an individual performer and begin thinking of yourself as an igniter of people.
Yeah. Love that. What about you, Eleanor?
I think the most important thing is to never stop putting yourself in other people's shoes and seeing the world as they see them, because you cannot possibly do a good enough job for your clients, for your colleagues, kind of all the customers you seek to get, if you cannot see the world from their perspective. And then to be really critical in looking at how your organisation is structured, and if you are truly really accessible and open for different types of audiences. And so I think that, and then I do think it is really enabling others. So it is not being insistent on doing and getting the credit for it, but really enabling people to tap into their potential and thrive. And one challenge sometimes when we work so fast is we don't have time to recognise people's potential, but great leaders recognise that potential and really push and are very challenging. And I think if you're not being challenging, then you need to go somewhere else, find some challenge, and then bring it back into your own organisation.
Brilliant. I mean, on that note, we're out of time. I want to thank you very much for your words of wisdom today. I think it's incredibly interesting, and I think that what I take away from this is an enormous amount of opportunity. But we've got to make sure as leaders that we're embracing that opportunity, like understanding the algorithm, you know, that we're bringing people along with us and ensuring that we're making the time to do that. And most importantly, moving at breakneck speed and with agility. And so I thank you very much for all of your words, and I appreciate you coming here today. Thank you very much, everyone.